The wind in Bitter Creek did not just blow. It punished. It came tearing down from the blue mountains like a living thing, ripping across the dry sage fields and slamming into the town with the force of a hammer. Dust spun through the main street in twisting devils, rattling windows and stripping hope from anyone still holding on to it. Inside the small clapboard church, the world felt tight and breathless. The wooden walls smelled of old beeswax and dry timber. Clara Vance stood near the altar, twisting her fingers into the rough fabric of a borrowed dress. She was 19, but the shadows under her eyes made her look older. The dress was charcoal gray, too tight in the waist, too loose in the shoulders, and smelled like someone else's life. Clara stared at the floorboards and counted the knots in the wood. It was the only way to keep her fear from choking her. The pews behind her were filled with curious townspeople. Hard-faced women who whispered behind bonnets and ranch hands, who watched her like she was a stray someone had dragged off the street. They believed she should be grateful a man had agreed to marry her at all. A girl with no money, no family, and no dowry was an easy target for judgment. The heavy church doors opened. Wind screamed inside for a moment, and then the doors slammed shut again. Silas Thorne walked down the aisle. Dust covered his long canvas coat, turning it the color of the land outside. He was tall, broad, and moved like a man who had known heavy work his whole life. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and a pale scar cut down his cheek into his beard. His boots clinked with each step. He did not look like a groom. He looked like a rancher trying to finish business before the sun went down. He stopped beside her. Clara kept her eyes on the floor. She could smell him, horses, leather, and wind. She flinched when his shadow touched her. The Reverend cleared his throat. "We are gathered here to join this man and this woman in the holy estate of matrimony." There were no hymns, no warm words, just duty. When asked, Silas's "I do" was a low rumble. Clara's "I do" was a whisper so faint it almost vanished in the air. There was no kiss, no celebration. The Reverend snapped his Bible shut, and it was done. Outside, the wind tore at Clara's skirt as Silas helped her climb into the wagon. His hand was rough and warm, and she flinched again. He paused, just for a second, then lifted her with quiet care. They left the town behind, the wheels rattling over the hard earth. Clara sat small and tense beside him, staring at the endless land. The open range made her feel even more alone. A single gray wolf watched them from a ridge before vanishing into the brush. "It is a fair piece yet," Silas said suddenly. His voice was deep, but not unkind. Clara only nodded. By the time they reached the ranch, night had swallowed the valley. The house was solid but plain, built from weathered logs. A windmill creaked in the dark. The place looked like it had fought the land for years and refused to give up. "You go on inside," Silas said as he stopped the wagon. "Door is unlocked." Clara stepped into the warm glow of the single lamp inside. The room was clean but bare. No curtains, no flowers, nothing soft, only a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and the cold silence of a bachelor's life. When Silas came in, he moved heavily, washing at the basin before offering supper. They ate stew without speaking. His eyes kept flicking toward her, not in anger but in quiet study, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle he never asked for. After dinner, he stood. "Bedroom is through here." Her stomach twisted. Her legs trembled as she followed him. The bedroom held a large iron bed covered in quilts. Silas set the lamp down, and the shadows stretched along the walls. "I'll turn my back," he said softly, "so you can prepare." Clara's shaking fingers fumbled with the borrowed dress. She slipped into bed, pulling the quilt to her chin. "I am ready," she whispered. Silas blew out the lamp. The mattress dipped as he lay beside her. She felt his warmth before his hand touched her shoulder, gentle, hesitant. But her body froze. The memory hit her like a scream. Rough hands, the smell of whiskey, being trapped with no escape. Her breath came fast and painful. She curled away from him, trembling so hard the bed shook. "It hurts," she gasped. "I am sorry. I can't. Maybe tomorrow or another night." Silas went still. He pulled back, slowly, quietly. He sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Shame and frustration settled over him like dust. The world told him he had a right. Law told him he had a right. But the sound of her crying in the dark cut deeper than any knife. He lay back down, but on top of the quilt, fully clothed, facing away from her. The space between them felt wide as the prairie. Clara cried herself to sleep. Silas lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the wind batter the house. He had wanted a partner, a family, a future, but beside him trembled a girl who feared him down to her bones. Morning came cold and bright. Silas was gone before she woke. On the table sat hot coffee and a note. Back at noon. Clara washed her face and stripped the bed. The sheets were untouched. In town, the story spread fast. By noon, everyone knew. She wouldn't let him touch her. The marriage wasn't real. Something was wrong with her. And the wind carried those whispers all the way back to the ranch. Clara felt each one like a knife. Silas felt each one like a failure. And the land around them waited, harsh and silent, for what would come next. The days on the Thorne Ranch were long, hard, and unforgiving. Clara woke before sunrise, pulling on her dress with cold fingers, while Silas stoked the stove in silence. Breakfast was simple, strong coffee and salt pork, and they ate like strangers forced together by the wind. After Silas rode out to work the cattle, the house fell silent. Clara scrubbed floors, hauled water from the stubborn old pump, and fought the endless Wyoming dust that seeped through every crack. Each task cut her hands, tore her nerves, and left her exhausted. But she kept going. She needed to be useful. She needed to prove she wasn't just a burden. She tried planting a small garden near the kitchen door. The soil fought her, hard as stone, but she pushed until her knuckles bled, watering the seeds day after day, shielding them with her own body when dust devils spun too close. When the first shoots appeared, fragile and hopeful, she almost cried. Silas noticed. He didn't say much, but Clara caught him glancing at the new curtains she had stitched from old feed sacks, at the neat repairs in his shirts, at the way she kept the house warm for him. Sometimes he even smiled. But nights stayed difficult. Silas lay beside her carefully, moving slow, waiting for her to relax. He touched her with gentle hands, but the moment his weight shifted toward her, panic exploded inside her chest. She would freeze, breath shaking, fear rising like a storm she couldn't stop. "It hurts," she whispered one night, tears spilling onto the pillow. "I'm sorry. Maybe later. Maybe tomorrow." Silas rolled away, his breath tight with frustration. He didn't yell. He didn't force. But she felt the weight of his disappointment, like a stone pressing on her ribs. He wanted a family, a future, an heir. And she couldn't give him anything. The whispers in town only made it worse. Weeks passed, and the story twisted like barbed wire. She's cold. She's broken. She tricked him. The marriage isn't real. One day in town, Clara overheard women whispering near the fabric bolts. "Some girls freeze up because they're hiding something," Mrs. Gable muttered. "Maybe she isn't pure like she claimed." Clara dropped a spool of thread. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't pick it up. When Silas found her pale and shaking in the wagon, she begged to see the doctor. "Maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe I can be fixed." The examination was cold and humiliating. The doctor asked rude questions, handled her like machinery, and scribbled notes without looking at her face. "You're healthy," he said with a bored shrug, "just nervous." Some women need a firm hand. Have your husband push through it. Nature will settle the rest. Quote. He handed Silas a slip of paper with instructions, as if Clara were a stubborn mule. Silas read it outside, his face turned to stone. Clara waited for him to agree, to say the doctor was right, to say he would no longer tiptoe around her fear. Instead, Silas struck a match, burned the note until it curled to ash, then dropped it in the dirt and ground it with his boot. "We're going home," he said. That night, Clara broke. Her voice was raw when she faced him in the kitchen. "He made me feel small," she whispered, shaking, "like I was something broken, something to fix or force." She covered her face. "I'm scared, Silas, not of you, but of being used again, of disappearing again." Silas didn't touch her. He moved slow, stopping several feet away. "I will never take what isn't freely given," he said softly. "If this is all we ever are, you'll still be my wife. You'll still have a home here. You're safe here, Clara." Her knees buckled. He caught her carefully and held her, lightly, gently, as if she might break. That night something changed. He lay beside her on his back, not touching, letting her come closer if she wanted. Slowly, her hand slid across the quilt and touched his. His fingers curled around hers. A bridge began forming between their two wounded hearts. But the world outside the ranch wasn't done with them. Spring storms came screaming across the plains. One blinding afternoon, a late snowstorm struck. Clara raced into the blizzard to save a lost calf, only to find herself directly in the path of a stampeded herd. She froze. Silas flew off his horse, tackled her to the ground, and rolled her under the fence just seconds before hooves thundered past. When he grabbed her arms, his voice broke with fear. "What were you thinking?" he shouted. "You could have died." But the anger melted into something deeper, terror of losing her. He pressed her to his chest, shaking harder than she was. That night they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, the storm raging outside. Clara looked at him differently, saw the man who leapt into danger for her, who held her like she mattered. She wanted to be close to him. "Come to bed," she whispered. Silas froze. He searched her face for fear, but saw only nervous hope. They tried. She wanted it. He was gentle, careful, patient, but when his weight shifted over her, the old terror snapped in her chest. She gasped and curled away, crying. "I'm sorry," she choked. "I can't. You deserve someone whole." Silas sat back, breathing hard, fighting his own storm of frustration. Then, for the first time, he cracked. He slammed his fist into the log wall. The sound hit the room like gunfire. Clara screamed and curled into a ball. Silas stared at his bleeding knuckles in horror. "What have I done?" He ran out into the freezing night and didn't return until dawn. The days that followed were filled with silence. Long, painful, heavy silence. Silas slept by the hearth. Clara drifted through chores like a ghost. But worse trouble was coming. Whispers in town said the marriage wasn't real, and if the marriage wasn't real, Silas could lose his ranch. Hiram Sterling, the richest man in the county, saw an opportunity. He rallied the church elders, stirred the legal pot, and prepared his move. Soon a letter came. A writ of inquiry. A challenge to their marriage. And Clara realized the truth. Her fear might cost Silas everything. The trouble arrived quietly, in the sheriff's tired hands. He rode up to the porch with dust on his coat and worry in his eyes. Silas stepped outside, jaw tight, as the sheriff handed him a sealed envelope. "It's a writ of inquiry," he said. "Sterling and the church elders want to challenge your marriage. If they prove it wasn't completed, the land title might revert back to the bank." Clara stood in the doorway, frozen. The porch spun beneath her feet. So it was true. Her fear wasn't just hurting Silas. It was destroying the only home she had ever known. That night, she sat by the window long after Silas fell asleep on his pallet by the hearth. She watched the wind push against the empty land, and something inside her hardened. For months she had carried shame alone. Now she saw it clearly. The world was using her pain against him. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was angry. 3 nights later, she woke to a terrible scream. A hoarse, a terrified, panicked scream that cut through the dark. Silas leapt up, grabbing his boots. "Fire!" Clara ran to the window. The barn was a tower of flames roaring into the sky. Silas didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the burning doorway. She grabbed a wet burlap sack and followed, ignoring the fear clawing at her throat. Together, with Jeb and Toby, they fought the fire. Sparks rained over them. Smoke choked their lungs. Horses screamed and kicked. Clara hauled buckets until her arms went numb. Silas dragged animals out through walls of heat. When the barn roof finally collapsed in a shower of sparks, the fire died enough for them to fall back, shaking and covered in soot. As the flames died, Silas stared toward the ridge. A shadow slipped away, a rider fleeing the scene. Silas grabbed his Winchester. The rage inside him, held back for months, finally burst free. "He burned our barn!" Silas growled. "Sterling's men!" He raised the rifle. He lined up the shot. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Silas!" Clara's voice cut through the smoke and fury. She stood beside him, face dirty with ash, eyes steady. "Look at me." Silas didn't lower the rifle. "He could come back," he said, voice shaking. "He wants us gone." "Sterling wants you angry," Clara whispered. "He wants you to kill someone so he can take the ranch. Don't do what he wants." Silas trembled. Sweat slid down his neck. His hands clenched around the gun. "Please," she said softly, "come back to me." Little by little the rage broke. The rifle lowered. The shot that could have ruined everything never came. He dropped the gun in the dirt and pulled Clara against him, shaking as hard as she was. The next day, the sheriff confirmed what they already suspected. "Arson," he said. "Sterling's fingerprints are all over this, but he's covered enough tracks to stay out of reach." Then he added, "The church council meets tomorrow. Sterling means to use that hearing to break you." Clara looked at the burned barn, at Silas's tired face, and made a decision. She would not be the reason he lost everything. The church was packed the next evening. Every seat was filled. People leaned forward, waiting to see the spectacle. Silas sat stiff in the front pew. Clara sat beside him, hands folded. They weren't touching, but their shoulders almost brushed. It was the closest they had sat in weeks. Reverend Prynne opened the meeting with heavy words about sanctity, duty, and the responsibility of wives. Beside him stood Sterling's lawyer, a slick man with a cold smile. "Mr. Thorne," the lawyer said loudly, "has this marriage been consummated?" The church fell silent. Clara felt Silas tense beside her. He rose halfway from his seat, ready to fight, ready to explode, but a small hand touched his arm. Clara stood. "I will answer." A wave of whispers rushed through the room. She walked into the aisle, her chin lifted, her voice trembling at first but soon steady. "My husband has not bedded me," she said, "not because he did not want to, but because I asked him not to." Gasps, shock, wide eyes. "I came here with scars you cannot see," she continued. "Scars from men who took more than they had any right to. I feared every shadow. I feared being touched. I feared disappearing again." She looked around the room, meeting every eye. "But Silas never forced me. He never shamed me. He waited. He held me when I cried. He protected me from the world and from myself." She pointed toward Silas. "You call him a fraud? I call him the only decent man who ever treated me like a person." Not a soul in the room moved. "He saved me," Clara said. "He fought fire and storm for me. He healed me with patience, not pressure. And our marriage, unfinished as it may be, is real, and it's ours." She stepped back, breathing hard. Sheriff Miller stood. "And Sterling's men burned their barn," he said. "Funny timing, ain't it?" Quote, whispers rose again. Different this time. Not judgment, agreement. Reverend Prynne looked defeated. "There's no grounds for annulment," he said quietly. "The marriage stands." Sterling shot to his feet, furious. "This isn't over." "It is for today," Silas said, still seated. The church emptied in a storm of murmurs, but Clara could barely stand. The moment her knees buckled, Silas caught her in his arms. He wrapped his coat around her and whispered, "I have never been prouder." They walked out of the church together. And for the first time, Clara felt seen, heard, safe. Months passed. The barn was rebuilt. The land remained theirs. The town began treating Clara with cautious respect. The quiet evenings on the porch became the place where their hearts stitched themselves together. And one cool September night, Clara handed Silas a tiny flannel shirt she had sewn. Silas froze. "Clara, are we?" "I think so," she whispered, touching her belly. "I think a little one is coming." Silas dropped to his knees, tears filling his eyes. His large hand covered hers. His voice shook. "We'll be good parents." Clara smiled. "We already are." Autumn storms came and went. One evening after the rain cleared, they stood on the porch, watching a sky full of stars. Silas wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her close, warm, and safe against his chest. "I love you, Silas," she whispered. He bowed his head, brushing her cheek with his lips. "I love you too, Clara, more than this land, more than my own breath." They stayed there until the wind softened and peace settled over the ranch like a blessing. The land was still wild, the world still harsh. But in that house, wrapped in each other's arms, they had finally found home.